The science just cannot work. Upon realizing and accepting the presented puzzle before me, and without affording myself the chance to think and argue with myself to make sense of this anomaly, I quickly turned my back on it and retraced my steps. Working against the flow of the water became quickly tiresome, and with the dark minutes from blanketing this entire forsaken, forlorn, mind-bending metaphor for reality, I took to the trees for shelter. The morning light awoke me from a perfectly undisturbed, dreamless sleep. After a full wash in the deepest part of the now reverse stream that I could find, I donned the mask again and got my bearings on the invisible spy map. I decided to continue in the direction I'd come the previous night. Passing the point, I joined the stream. A little further on, and I'd find a fork. If I was correct, I'd follow the fork, follow the water, and eventually come to the sea, not too far from the harbour, marked down as Clark's Cove. I was correct, and with a few hours to spare before sundown, I was back in the inn from where I swiped the whiskey, and I was, with gusto, draining another fresh bottle. Sat, now with myself as company, in an inn with no publican, a pub with no innkeeper. Nothing is more pathetic than anything with a set purpose which is not being purposefully utilised. Which at this moment, in my life, is my life, in its entirety. What am I doing here? Why am I here? I can vaguely remember arriving. Where is Hennessy? Who is the Smorps character I let my temper scare away? And how did he get here? What the hell am I doing here with my future self? I was drunk, and my mind was becoming fuzzy and sluggish, and yes, it was a very welcome feeling. I gave in and made my way upstairs to find a bed to sleep in. Top of the stairs, first room I opened, a huge bed, sheets and pillows, the full Monty. I staggered and collapsed into it, and I was asleep before I was horizontal. Dawn came quicker than I hoped, and the sun rudely beckoned me up and out of my bed before my mind was really quite ready to. Hunger had carved its way into my belly during the night, and had sat there waiting for me to wake before letting me know that it was time to get some real food. I searched the cupboards in the inn's kitchen larder. My bounty was 3 eggs, which I didn't have to crack to know they were rotten, and thankfully, a large sealed glass jar of beef or turkey jerky. 10 minutes later, stood outside the inn, chewing endlessly on the same piece of jerky, still unsure of the dried flesh's exact genus. I took in the view of the harbour before me. One specific sight caused me to drop the jar of jerky, which smashed between my feet a split second after the discovery I'd made registered in my scrambled, heavy brain. The boat in which we had arrived in, moored towards the far end of the jetty. No real surprise there. I'm sure that's where I left it. But it was the boat's name that shocked me. Shocked me into dropping my breakfast. The boat's name was now keeping my mouth hanging open. The boat's name, in foot-high painted lettering on her bow. It was Hennessy. Rushing back into the inn and up the stairs to the room I spent the night in, I grasped my bag and checked all the contents were there as I raced back down and out the building. Down the jetty, towards the boat with the foot-high lettering, saying Hennessy, I yelled at the top of my lungs twice in a row as I ran closer and closer.
Hennessy!
Standing on her smooth wooden deck, which creaked quietly as she buffeted with the gentle tide, I donned the spy goggles and removed the secret map from its precious container and held it up in outstretched arms. I failed to notice in the bottom left corner the last time I looked at this map more tiny lettering, upside-down lettering, which when the paper was corrected read, Spin, Eit, I-N-D-C-E-L-E. Something in my mind clicked and I knew what to do. I put it down to the scepter's eerie powers to match this island's freaky vibes. I simply bent the paper back on itself into a tube. As the two opposing corners met, I could see tiny lettering came together, too neatly to be of any sort of coincidence. Once I held it aloft and let the light penetrate through the parchment, the letters now read, Spin right, 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 again and once left. So, simple. I spun the map as instructed. Now lay in my hands was an upside-down map. This map now made perfect sense. The memory loss, the frequent regressions, the back-to-front river flowing uphill. Of course, everything is backwards here. I got to work immediately, hoisting the sail and guiding myself out the dock towards the Big Blue. Without a second's thought for supplies and fresh water, such was my desperation to get off this cursed island, and back to my baby-soft burgundy leather armchair and collection of Sherlock Holmes novels. Once travel had commenced, I became increasingly aware of the lack of wind in my sails, yet I was racing along at a cracking pace. The ship's sails were clearly full of wind, yet there was none on my back. My only conclusion, owing entirely to the recently discovered backwards theory, was that the wind wasn't blowing and pushing, but rather sucking and dragging me along. I spread my map out in front of me, weighted down with my jeweled scepter cum compass. Time to put this theory of mine to the test. The red rubies were beginning to move and slide into position, whirling and whirring in a frenzied, elaborate chaos. Finally, they settled, still pointing in the direction from which I had just come. I didn't deviate from my planned route, and I carried sailing straight on. The sun was now beginning to fall, and soon it would be gone. The thought of being alone out here in this dark and gargantuan ocean terrified me to the point where I considered turning back and allowing the compass to guide me through. I turned to look back at the island in the briefest of considerations and was stunned to see, well, nothing. It was all but gone from sight. The only part visible now was the smoky effect the great waterfall gave off. That was all the motivation that was required. I continued onward, and onward ad infinitum. Hours passed. The stars moved above, and the further I travelled, the intensity of the light from the compass grew and grew. Suddenly, on the perfectly calm ocean, came a rogue wave which shook the boat violently, causing me to fight to keep the rudder straight and stay on course. Another rogue wave, apparently from nowhere, and another, followed by no less than 6 more, all battering me from the starboard side. I was now slightly off track. The red compass, now at a 30-degree angle, still heading in the opposite direction to that which I was being guided, made me happy enough to forget that my ancient map relic was now ruined. Soaked with salt water, it was already beginning to disintegrate, and the wind which was now beginning to pick up, this time it was blowing, and gushing, and sucking, and Christ alive, it sucked. I was in the middle of a squall, and didn't even see it coming, as if I'd sailed straight through an invisible wall behind which the mother of all storms was hiding. On top of a wall of water 30 feet high, looking down on your own untimely death, is not a nice place to be, ever. Especially when one hand is holding a heavy lump of metal, and the other an increasingly uncomfortable rudder. My boat heaved violently forward, and my instincts took over. Releasing the relic in favor of placing both hands on the rudder, it dropped to the deck with a heavy bonk sound and rolled to the edge of the boat, resting for just enough time for me to confirm I was still travelling in the opposite direction it was telling me to, before slipping into the black wateriness forever. Not having the luxury of time to mourn this sad loss of history and mystery, I made an attempt to set a bearing on any star distinguishable enough through the cloud and sheeting rain which illuminated with blinding clarity like city walls of aluminium as the forks of lightning rattled through them. I managed to spot one and tried to keep it in sight while I made a grab for my satchel and unhooked the strap in an attempt to securely tie the rudder in place while I held on as best as I could to the mainsail mast. The first part of my plan went well. The rudder was securely tied to its own casting. Now, strapless bag in hand, I stupidly hurried to the centre of the little boat. In the half a second of consciousness I had left, I thought of 2 things. 1. Why hadn't I taken my shoes off? The first thing you do on a boat is take your shoes off. I learned that years ago on a gully cruise tour of the Turkish islands with my parents, that you get a better grip on the deck in bare feet. The captain, a perpetually drunk, white-haired man of 40 with no front teeth, had told me so and practiced what he preached. 2. Where had I last heard the song which was going on and on in my head? Johnny Cash's Marathi band, trumpets followed by I fell into a burning ring of fire. I slipped spectacularly, hurtling towards the mast, which should have been my life preserver, both arms uselessly flailing in front of me, grasping repeatedly for some purchase, both missing their desired target, paving the way for my head to make a crunchingly sickening contact right between my eyes. Blackness. Time moved in and out, up and down, like the ordered chaos of the ocean waves I was hopelessly drifting along on. The sail tattered and ruffling in the now slight wind, pinning me to the deck like a vacuum-packed fillet steak. Drifting on and on, my breathing shallow, my head wound slowly clotting, repairing and beginning to form a scar on the bridge of my nose I would proudly sport for the rest of my life. My pounding head began to lift, and I was enveloped in darkness. A damp darkness. My mind began to race. Reaching out, feeling the darkness with numb fingers, the thirst had advanced to dehydration, and I felt pitifully weak as a result. As I pushed the mainsail away from my face, the light was so bright and the pain so intense and unexpected, I passed out again. A long while passed before the sound of the boat's keel grinding ashore against the sandbank jolted me out of my unconsciousness. The hull then began repeatedly tapping something solid, as the tide lapped and pushed the boat into a gentle rhythm. Donk, donk, donk. I anticipated the light this time and slowly peered out from under the sail. It was perfect nighttime darkness. The moon was visible with such an intense clarity, I found it painful to look straight at it. Slowly, staggering to my feet, I searched the boat for anything I could muster, remembering the compass had fallen overboard forever, the map being lost to the wind. The bag, however, the bag had miraculously stayed in the boat. Tearing it open, my first instincts were for water. I knelt, crestfallen. The satchel had stayed on the boat, but the entire contents had spilled out, also lost forever. Alone, wet, scared, utterly exhausted, I collapsed. In another world, something was beeping, slow and with purpose. As I slipped from dreams to reality once more, the beeps faded. Sitting up in a bed, it immediately became clear I was in a hospital. "Hello," I tried to shout, but only croaked. I tried a few more times, but gave up, as it hurt too much. Everything hurt too much. Just as I closed my eyes, I tried to remember what had happened since leaving the island, and I remembered every part of that. The possibility dawned on me that I had been in a coma and dreamt the whole thing. Well, that explains that.
"You are very, very lucky," a voice to my right said suddenly. "A farmer only found you on that track because he lost a cow and was searching for it. We had to have the lifeboat out to get you from those rocks. You were minutes away from being swept back out with the tide, so you were. Any memories how you got there in the first place?"
There it was, the confirmation I was looking for. I was in that boat. I was on that island. It was real. No, there will be a perfectly rational, scientific explanation. I considered explaining how I thought I'd got there, or how I dreamed I had, but thought better of it. The last thing I needed now were extra psychological tests on top of God knows what probes and other instruments were coming my way. Instead, I inquired, "I say, Doctor, I'm eternally grateful for the help, but did the farmer or rescue crew say anything about what he may have found on the boat?"
"Not a thing. Not even the bloody mast. Only things of yours that survived was the clothes you came in."
I see. My clothes, Doctor. Where are they, please? I asked, mustering up as much politeness as possible and fighting back tears of despair and joy.
"I'm no doctor. I'm a nurse. But I hung them up on the back of that chair just now."
I turned my head in the direction the nurse was pointing. I saw my battered shirt resting underneath my slightly less ruined trousers. Then I felt a surge of exhaustion completely overwhelm me. I fell asleep before I'd even had the chance to complain of tiredness. 5 hours later, I was awoken by a familiar, steadily emitting light penetrating the perfect dark. Through blurred vision, with tired, red, sore eyes, I located the source. The chair on which the kindly nurse had hung my clothes, the back pocket of my trousers, an orange glow. From the only piece of evidence I had inadvertently brought back with me. Fulgurites. Just as you may look into a mirror, what you see is not really what is there. It is the reverse. It is backwards. Behind the glass of the mirror, looking back at you, is the mirrored life you are living in. Everything you see makes sense, but just look past the glass. Look just past the reflective surface of any puddle, any rock pool, any ocean, and you may just glimpse upon the world beyond. In this case, however, you may capsize into that reflection, into that world where everything makes perfect sense in a mirror, or the concave of a spoon. The very same world, where somewhere high in the ether, on the other side of the firmament, where, just as the realization is slowly settling in my brain as fact, on the other side, a young boy carrying that all-too-familiar scepter reaches out towards a distinctly carved piece of wood, floating just out of arm's reach, just because the glowing orange hue is instructing him so.